Good morning, friends, and a very good evening to all of you who are watching from the Western world. My name is Dr. Aditya, and with me is my friend and colleague, Dr. Amit Agarwal. And it is our great fortune today. This morning, we're broadcasting from India and hosting Dr. Dean Ornish, our very esteemed and honored guest for our talk. Welcome, Dr. Dean Ornish.
Thank you. It's an
Friends,
honor to be here.
thank you so much, sir. Likewise. And for me, for millions of others, Dr. Dean Ornish has been a living legend, a person who has truly dedicated and committed his medical practice to preventing many, many lifestyle related illnesses, making path breaking research in illnesses which were in their time considered incurable. And even now, he continues to research on many diseases which are termed incurable. And we will hear from Sir himself about what research he and his team are continuing to do. Give me a few moments to introduce a few more words about Dr. Dean Ornish, who is also the founder of the Preventive Medicine Research Institute. He is the professor of medicine at the University of California in San Francisco. Sir has received numerous honors, including the Outstanding Young Alumnus Award from the University of Texas, Austin, and the National Public Health Hero Award from the University of California, Berkeley. Dr. Ornish was recognized by the Time magazine as Time 100 Innovator, by Life magazine as one of the 50 most influential members of his generation, and by Forbes magazine as one of the world's 7 most powerful teachers. Friends, please join me once again in welcoming Dr. Ornish. And Dr. Ornish, the platform is now yours. Thank you once again for accepting our invitation and sharing with us.
Thank you so much, Dr. Aditya, for your kind introduction. And I'm grateful to be here virtually with all of you. For your morning is nighttime here in San Francisco. And I appreciate the chance to be of service in such a meaningful way. I'm going to share my screen here. And I'm going to talk today about the power of lifestyle medicine. And lifestyle medicine is a field that I helped create, which is using lifestyle changes not only to help prevent disease, but to treat and often to reverse it. To me, it's the most exciting field in medicine today. I think there's a convergence of forces that makes this the right idea at the right time. The program has 4 elements. It's a whole foods plant-based diet that's naturally low both in fat and sugar and refined carbs, various what we call stress management techniques, which are really more than that, which we'll talk more about, including stretching, breathing, meditation, derived from yoga, moderate exercise, both aerobic and some strength training, resistance training, and psychosocial support, support groups, and the love and intimacy that we share, a sense of community, sense of family, or to reduce it even further, to eat well, move more, stress less, and love more. That's it. And the more diseases we study and the more underlying mechanisms we do research on, the more scientific evidence we have to show how powerful these simple changes can be and how quickly they can occur. You know, we tend to think of advances in medicine as being a new drug, a new laser, something really high tech and expensive. And we often have a hard time believing that these such simple changes can make such a powerful difference, but they often do. And I think our unique contribution has been to use these very high tech, expensive, state of the art scientific measures to prove how powerful these very simple and low tech and low cost interventions can be. And over the last 4 decades, my colleagues and I have shown that these simple changes can reverse a wide variety of chronic diseases. We're able to show for the first time that heart disease, even severe heart disease, could actually be reversed by making these changes in most cases. Later studies, and I'll go through these in more detail in a minute, early stage prostate cancer, type 2 diabetes, hypertension, autoimmune diseases, elevated cholesterol, obesity, cellular aging, and even gene expression. Now, I wondered, why is it that, you know, with all this interest in personalized medicine, it was actually these same lifestyle changes that could reverse all of these different chronic diseases. And so I wrote a book that came out about a year and a half ago, almost 2 years ago, with my wife Ann, called Undo It. It's a my favorite key on the computer keyboard has always been the undo button, and I thought, gee, wouldn't it be nice if we had an undo button in our lives? And now we do. But also, my spiritual teacher for many years, from South India, a man named Sri Swami Satchidananda, liked to make puns. And people would say, "What are you, a Hindu?" He'd say, "No, I'm an Undu." So it's partly an homage to him. And this is my wife, Anne, who I've been working with now for the last 23 years. And the book puts forth a what I thought was a radical new unifying theory, which I've been surprised how well it's been accepted. And it goes something like this, that the reason why these same lifestyle changes can reverse so many different chronic diseases is that I don't think they're so different from each other. They have more in common than they are different. And I was trained, like all doctors, to view heart disease and type 2 diabetes and early stage prostate cancer and so on as different diagnoses, different diseases, different treatments. But I've come to believe that they actually share more in common, that they're really, in many respects, the same disease manifesting and masquerading in different forms because they all share the same underlying biological mechanisms, things like chronic inflammation, overstimulation of the sympathetic nervous system due to stress, changes in the microbiome, the 100 trillion cells that we have coexisting with us in the gut, oxidative stress, apoptosis, angiogenesis, changes in gene expression and telomeres and immune function. And each one of these mechanisms, in turn, is directly influenced by what we eat, how we respond to stress, how much exercise we get, and how much love and support we have. And so the guiding principle, which I also learned from Swami Satchidananda, is to always say, what is the cause of a problem? There's usually a chain of events that leads to almost any problem, in this case, say heart disease. And if we just literally or figuratively bypass the problem, or if we literally are mopping up the floor around the sink that's overflowing without also turning off the faucet, then the same old problem often comes back again. I actually got interested in doing this when I was learning how to do coronary bypass surgery many years ago as a medical student with Michael DeBakey, one of the doctors who really pioneered the procedure. And we cut people open, we bypassed their clogged arteries. He would tell them they were cured. And all too often they would go home and, eat the same junk food, not manage stress, not exercise, smoke cigarettes, and so on. And their new bypasses, their new grafts would reocclude, and we'd have to cut them open again, sometimes multiple times. So for me, bypass surgery became a metaphor of an incomplete approach, that we were literally bypassing the problem without also treating the cause, just like mopping up the floor around the sink that's overflowing. And even with medications, when a doctor puts a patient on drugs to lower their cholesterol, their blood pressure, their blood sugar, and they say, "Doctor, how long do I have to take these medications?" What does the doctor usually say? "Forever." It's like, how long do I have to mop up the floor around the sink that's overflowing? Like, forever. Well, why don't we just turn off the faucet? And what I've been so impressed by over the years is that when we treat the cause, when we change our diet and lifestyle, that our bodies often have this remarkable capacity to begin healing, and much more quickly than we had once realized when we can treat the cause. So I began doing these studies when I was a second-year medical student in 1977, and found that 10 patients in a hotel for a month, that 8 of the 10 showed improvement in blood flow to their heart, and their chest pain went away. But we had no control group, so repeated the study with a randomized control group, and I found again after a month that the ability of the heart to pump blood improved, which we published in the Journal of the American Medical Association. Went to Boston, to Harvard and Mass General to do my medical residency, then moved to San Francisco and began the most definitive study, which is called the Lifestyle Heart Trial. And we used quantitative arteriography, the state-of-the-art measure of blockages in the coronary arteries, and cardiac PET scans, the state-of-the-art measure of blood flow in the heart, as well as cardiac events. And what we found is that the arteries got more clogged, shown in the red line here, after 1 year, and even more clogged after 5 years in the randomized control group. That's the so-called natural history of heart disease, is to get worse and worse. But instead of getting worse and worse, we found that in the green line, the people who made these lifestyle changes actually showed less blockage after 1 year, and even more reversal after 5 years. And we published the 1 year findings in the Lancet and the 5 year findings in the Journal of the American Medical Association. This was the first study showing that lifestyle changes could actually reverse the progression of even severe heart disease. And instead of getting worse and worse, many people could get better and better. We also found that there was a 400%, a fourfold increase in blood flow to the heart compared to the control group as measured by cardiac PET scans. This is a representative patient. You can see the narrowing here where the arrow is. This is where the artery is partially severely clogged. And just a year later, you can see it's less clogged. And because the blood flow to the heart is a fourth power function of the radius of the artery, even modest increases in the blockages can cause, even modest increases in the diameter or the radius of the artery because the blockage is less can cause really big improvements in blood flow. You can see here actually measured using the cardiac PET scan. Blue and black at the beginning is no blood flow, and a year later, orange and white is maximal. And this wasn't just best case. It turned out that 99% of the patients stopped or reversed the progression of their heart disease as measured by cardiac PET scans, whereas only 5% of the randomized control group patients got worse. And one of the interesting findings was that it wasn't how old or how sick they were. The main function that determined whether or not they got better was that the more closely they followed this lifestyle program, the more they changed their diet and lifestyle, the more they improved at any age in a dose response correlation. So that the least adherers, the arteries got more clogged, the moderate adherers, it stopped it, but it wasn't enough to reverse it. And the people who made the biggest changes, actually, the arteries became less and less clogged over time. And there were 2.5 times as many what are called cardiac events, heart attacks, strokes, bypasses, angioplasties, and stents in the group that made these lifestyle changes compared to the group that didn't. Now, to put a human face on it, this is from a documentary film called Escape Fire. One of the patients in our study describing his improvements 25 years later after he started. It's now been 35 years since he started, and he's still doing well. So it's just couple minutes long, but stories can be powerful, and I want to share this with you just to get a sense of what this really means in a person's life. Oh, I should mention also that just this past week, U.S. News and World Report, which ranks a panel of experts, ranks among quality of hospitals and medical schools and so on. They also rank diets, and they ranked what they call the Ornish diet as #1 for heart health for the 10th year since they began rating diets in 2011. Here's the patient talking about his improvements.
25 years ago, I had 5 restaurants in San Francisco. It was a great life. I smoked 6 cigars a day, 10 cups of coffee, a lot of wine. It was wonderful. And I had a massive heart attack.
Oh no, sorry. Let me go. I think I hit the wrong button. Let's try that one again. My mistake. I'll just skip here forward a little bit.
San Francisco. It was a great life. I smoked 6 cigars a day, 10 cups of coffee, a lot of wine. It was wonderful. And I had a massive heart attack. I was in the hospital for 2 weeks. I could hardly just about walk 3 steps, and I'd have to stop and rest. I was popping 20 or 30 nitrils a day. But then Dean Ornish was starting his program to see if you can reverse heart disease through lifestyle change. Doctor and asked if he could approach me. He told Dean, "How long is the program?" So he said it was a year. And my doctor told him he wouldn't recommend taking me because he didn't think I would live the year. So he figured I was going to die because I was in such bad shape. And now, 25 years later, and I'm in pretty good shape.
Like I said, it's been 35 years now. His doctor died during that time, which is kind of ironic. But here's a guy who was having 20 or 30 episodes of chest pain a day, who's been essentially now pain-free for decades after making these changes. And even more dramatic is the next patient, who's a doctor himself, an internist. And he had such a massive heart attack that he was told that only a new heart could save him. And while waiting for a new heart, he went through our reversing heart disease program at UCLA Medical Center, and to get in better shape for the heart transplant. And after 9 weeks, his heart disease improved so much that he didn't need a heart transplant anymore. So what's the more radical intervention here? A new heart, or eat well, move more, stress less, love more. Let me go ahead and play this for you.
So the situation I'm describing here is of an internal medicine doctor who started a new chapter in his life with his wife, moving to Lake Arrowhead, having just opened a private practice office after all of our kids went to college and we could relocate. And just as this was ramping up, we had a horrible car accident which precipitated a heart attack. that dropped my cardiac functioning down to basically 11 to 13 or 14, 15% of what it should have been, which resulted in intractable chest pain, angina, trouble breathing, inability to walk from room to room, go upstairs without being carried. I was offered a heart transplant as the only way to stay alive. And at the 11th hour, I entered the Ornish program, which provided me with an entire paradigm shift with respect to stress management, exercise, diet, nutrition, and despite not believing it myself and having other physicians who didn't believe in it either, it worked beyond my wildest dreams. I'm now able to exercise moderately, I can work full-time, I can live at 6,000 feet, and our quality of life is actually better than it was before.
I'll even let him take my lipstick off.
Can you believe this is my wife?
I love hearing stories like that. I have thousands of them. In 2011, after 16 years of review, the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Innovation, Medicare Services, created a new benefit category to cover my program for reversing heart disease, which is great because when you change reimbursement, it changes medical practice and even medical education. This was their decision memo. The model is that we train a team of people. There's a doctor, a nurse, a meditation and yoga teacher, exercise physiologist, dietitian, and psychologist. Patients come twice a week, 4 hours at a time, for 9 weeks. They get an hour of exercise, an hour of meditation and yoga, a support group, and a group meal with a lecture. We then found that these same lifestyle changes could reverse early stage prostate cancer in collaboration with the chair of urology at UCSF and the chair of urology at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center in New York. We took 93 men who had biopsy-proven prostate cancer, and we randomly assigned them into two groups. Neither group was getting conventional treatment, so we could have a true non-intervention control group to compare to. And we found once again the control group got worse, the PSA levels went up. PSA is a marker for prostate cancer, whereas they went down in the green line or got better. The differences were highly significant. We published that in the leading peer-reviewed urology journal. And once again, we found that the more people change their lifestyle, the lower their PSA came at any age, which is a very empowering message because it says it's not too late to begin making these changes just because you're older. The tumor growth, when we added some of their serum to a standard line of prostate tumor cells growing in tissue culture, was inhibited 70% versus only 9% in the control group, also in direct proportion to the degree of lifestyle change. The more people change their lifestyle, the more it directly inhibited the prostate tumor from growing. And this is an example of a patient who's using what's called MR spectroscopy, measures the tumor activity, which is diminishing here, as well as the PSA coming down. And it turns out that none of the experimental group patients needed surgery or radiation or chemotherapy during the first year, but 6 of the control group patients did. So this is, we also found that these same lifestyle changes can reverse type 2 diabetes, which, as you know, is pandemic throughout India and much of Asia, as well as through the US. Half of Americans today have diabetes or prediabetes. Now, it turns out that lifestyle changes are actually better than drugs at preventing type 2 diabetes. This is from the New England Journal of Medicine, the landmark diabetes prevention program, which showed that lifestyle changes, not even as significant as the ones that we have, work better than drug and better than placebo at preventing type 2 diabetes. From the EPIC study that was done in Europe, just moderate lifestyle changes, walking a half an hour a day, not smoking, eating a reasonably healthy diet, and keeping a healthy weight prevented 93% of type 2 diabetes. And again, because these same lifestyle changes affect so many different other conditions, they found that, not surprisingly, it significantly reduced not only type diabetes, but heart attacks, strokes, and the most common forms of cancer as well. Lifestyle changes can actually be better than drugs at treating type 2 diabetes. This is from a study that showed that when you change your lifestyle, your insulin receptors become more sensitive. And so many doctors, again, under your doctor's supervision, don't make changes in your medications without consulting your doctor first. But many people are finding they can reduce or even sometimes get off of their diabetes medications when they make these lifestyle changes. Again, don't do that without your doctor monitoring your blood sugar. Now, the complications of diabetes are really awful, any one of which would be awful, but together are truly awful. Heart attacks, blindness, amputations, kidney damage, impotence, and so on. But according to the American Diabetes Association, if you can get your hemoglobin A1C, which is just an average measure of your blood sugar, down below 7 with lifestyle, not necessarily with drugs, you can prevent most, if not all, of these complications. And that's just what we found in a demonstration project we did with 786 men and women who had type 2 diabetes, went from above 7 to below 7 after 12 weeks, and even a year later, even though the program was only 12 weeks long, it was still low. So we wonder what some of the mechanisms might be to help explain that. What were the changes in gene expression? And so we did a study published with Craig Venter, who was the first to decode the human genome, that over 500 genes were changed in only 3 months, which is amazing when you think about it. I mean, when I was in medical school, we were taught that, your genes are your fate. There's nothing you can do about it. But it's actually, you're not actually changing the genes, but you're affecting the switches that turn these genes off and on. If you can turn off a gene that causes heart disease or cancer or whatever, it's functionally as though you're changing the genes. And we also found that we turned off the genes that cause all these mechanisms that I mentioned at the beginning of my talk, chronic inflammation, oxidative stress, et cetera, which in turn lead to so many different chronic diseases. That's why, from a genetic standpoint, when you make these lifestyle changes, it affects and helps prevent and even reverse so many different chronic diseases because they're all connected through their genes. The oncogenes that promote prostate, breast, and colon cancer were also downregulated. These along the right column are all genes that cause prostate, breast, and colon cancer. Red is turned on at the beginning. 3 months later, green is turned off. So you can see how dramatic these changes are in just 3 months. So our genes are a predisposition, but our genes are not our fate. Not to blame, but to empower. Because if it's all in your genes, what can you do, right? But if there's something we can do about that, again, not to blame people, but to empower them, then we can do something different. We also did a study with Dr. Elizabeth Blackburn, who was the first to discover the roles of telomeres and telomerase. Telomeres are the ends of our chromosomes that regulate aging, how long we live. And as we get older, they're like the plastic tips on the ends of your shoelace that keep your shoelace from unraveling. They keep our DNA from unraveling. And as they replicate over time, the telomeres tend to get shorter and shorter. And as our telomeres get shorter, our lives get shorter. And the risk of premature death from so many different chronic diseases, all the ones we've been talking about, goes up proportional to that. Now, she had found that chronic stress and smoking cigarettes and being sedentary and eating junk food could make your telomeres get shorter faster, which is one of the reasons why those lifestyle changes cause you to live a shorter life. And so I thought, if bad things make them shorter, maybe good things make them longer. So we did a study and we found that just after 3 months of making these same lifestyle changes we've been talking about, the telomerase, the enzyme that repairs and lengthens telomeres, increased by 30% in just 3 months, which we published in the Lancet Oncology. And over a 5-year period, we found they actually got longer. It's the first intervention showing that anything can actually lengthen your telomeres, whereas they got shorter in the control group. We also published this in the Lancet. And the Lancet editors sent out a press release worldwide, and they called it the first study ever indicating that positive lifestyle changes may reverse aging on a cellular level, which as I get older, I find very heartening. And here again, we found the more people change their lifestyle, the longer their telomeres got. So these same lifestyle changes affect dementia as well. And certainly as our populations get older, people are more and more afraid of losing their memories, because when you lose your memories, you really lose everything. Now, it turns out that, again, these same simple lifestyle changes are what's good for your heart is good for your brain. Eating just 5 or more fruits and vegetables a day causes almost a 50% decrease in the likelihood of developing dementia. A third of Alzheimer's disease is caused by 7 modifiable risk factors, all of which are related to heart disease as well: diabetes, high blood pressure, smoking, all the usual suspects. Just something like walking a half an hour a day can cause so much neurogenesis, new brain cells growing, that your brain can actually get bigger. That was thought impossible not that long ago. And particularly the part of your brain called the hippocampus that controls memory. It's amazing that in just 3 months, you can actually grow so many new brain cells, your brain can get measurably bigger. And some of my favorite things can increase neurogenesis. Chocolate and tea and blueberries increase neurogenesis, where, again, what's bad for your heart is bad for your brain. Saturated fat, sugar, and nicotine decrease it. In those over 65 years of age, the risk of cognitive decline was 38% lower just by eating more fruits and vegetables. In those eating omega-3 fatty acids found in flaxseed oil or algae or fish oil had a 60% lower risk of developing Alzheimer's disease. Now, it turns out there have been over 150 drug trials, 500 drug trials in the last 15 years at a cost of over $15 billion. And none of those drugs has worked over the last 17 years. I mean, they maybe slow the rate at which you get worse, and that's about it. And that's left a lot of people feeling really sad because, $15 billion is a lot of money to spend and nothing really to show for it. But something as simple as just taking some fish oil, 3 grams a day, or flaxseed oil, 3 grams a day if you're vegan, can reduce your risk of Alzheimer's by 60%. I mean, I can assure you if a drug company came out with a new drug that could help prevent Alzheimer's by reduce the risk of it by 60%, it'd be $1 billion drug, but this is something that just costs pennies a day to do. Also, cognitive function in one study was positively associated with eating more omega-3 fatty acids, but negatively with saturated fats, omega-6, which promote inflammation, and homocysteine, which also promotes inflammation. Again, what's bad for your heart is bad for your brain. Saturated fat and trans fats, which double your risk of a heart attack, also double your risk of developing Alzheimer's disease. And it's just not, and we're finding that other people are also finding that by changing many things at the same time, that there's a synergy, that 1 + 1 doesn't equal 2, but 10. And so when you change your diet and exercise and stress management and social support, eat well, move more, stress less, love more, it's more than an additive benefit, it's really synergistic. Now, we know now that amyloid in the brain is part of the reason why people get dementia, but that amyloid actually begins in your gut and the 100 trillion cells in your microbiome. And then when you change your lifestyle, it changes what's in the microbiome, which can also help reduce your risk of that amyloid ending up in your brain. Meditation alone can reduce brain aging by, in this case, at the age of 50, people who have been meditating were 7.5 years younger in terms of what their brains looked like on an MRI scan. So then the question is, can lifestyle changes reverse dementia? There was a study done by Jim Blumenthal at Duke where they looked at men and women, and they found that the DASH diet, which is a kind of an in-between diet between a vegan diet and a typical Indian or Western diet, diet, exercise, both or neither. And again, it really required both the exercise and the diet, which showed the greatest improvement, not just one or the other. Which then brings us to Alzheimer's. We're now in the beginning, the first study, the first clinical trial to see if we can actually reverse the progression of early stage Alzheimer's disease. And we're in the middle of it now. My mom died of Alzheimer's. I have one of the ApoE4 genes for it. And so I'm at risk for it. So I have a personal interest in this. And I think we're at a place with Alzheimer's very reminiscent of where we were with heart disease 40 years ago. In other words, the same biological mechanisms are in play, the same lifestyle factors are in play, and less intensive interventions can help prevent dementia. We think a more intensive intervention might actually reverse the progression of early stage Alzheimer's. Since we're in the middle of a trial, we can't really talk much about it, but I'm cautiously optimistic and hopeful that, I'm hopeful that we can show that. And if we do, it'll give millions of people new hope and new choices. Even if we were to show it did nothing, that would at least be important for people to know. So stay tuned, we'll keep you posted. As I mentioned, Medicare has been covering this program. It's the same program that we're using in our Alzheimer's study as well. And the last thing I want to talk about is that the other epidemic, certainly in the US and the UK and much of Europe, but also more and more through India and Asia as well, where families have tended to be much stronger and social ties have been stronger, is that there's been a real breakdown of the social networks that used to give people a sense of love and connection and community. 50 years ago, in our country at least, most people would grow up in a neighborhood with 2 or 3 generations of people. They had an extended family that they saw regularly. They had a job that they'd been at for 10 years or more and knew the people that they worked with. They had a church or a synagogue or a club or a mosque or a temple that they went to on a regular basis. And many people today don't have any of those things. And they think, well, that's just, no big deal. But it turns out that I don't know any factor in medicine that has a bigger impact on our survival than loneliness and depression on the one hand, or love and intimacy on the other. Study after study have shown that people who are lonely and depressed are 3 to 10 times more likely to get sick and die prematurely than those who have a sense of love and connection and community. And I don't know anything in medicine that has that kind of impact, that anything that brings us together is really healing. Even the word healing comes from the to make whole. Yoga comes from the Sanskrit, to yoke, to unite, union. These are really old ideas that we're really just rediscovering now. And certainly information is important, but it's not usually sufficient to motivate most people to change their lifestyle. I mean, it's not like you say to your patient, if you're a doctor, hey, Mr. Jones or Miss Smith, did you know smoking's bad for you? I'd like you to quit. And they go, I didn't know it's bad for me. I'll quit today. Everybody knows it's bad for you. It's on every package of cigarettes, certainly in the US at least. So the information is important, but it's not sufficient. So why is that? Well, if so many people are feeling lonely and depressed, I'd ask people, why do you smoke and overeat and drink too much and abuse opioids and play too many video games? These behaviors seem so maladaptive to me. And they'd look at me and they go, you don't get it, Dean. You don't have a clue. These behaviors are not maladaptive. They're very adaptive because they help us deal with our emotional pain, our loneliness, our depression. I've had patients on more than one occasion say, I've got 20 friends in this pack of cigarettes and they're always there for me and nobody else is. You're going to take away my 20 friends? What are you going to give me? Or they'll say food fills that void, or fat coats my nerves and numbs the pain, or opioids numb the pain. We've had a huge opioid epidemic in our country. Or working all the time distracts me from my pain, or video games distract me from my pain, or drinking too much or abusing other drugs distracts me from my pain. And so again, if we go back to that cartoon of the doctor busily mopping up the floor, but no one's turning off the faucet, it's not enough to just treat the symptoms. We need to treat the cause. And the cause is really the loneliness and depression. So that's why the Love More part of our program is so important. People say, well, I get the diet and exercise and, meditation, but Love More, that's kind of weird. What does that have to do with it? Well, here's one example of a study that was published in the Journal of the American Medical Association at Stanford. 6 months after a heart attack, those that were depressed, 16% were dead. Those that were not depressed, only 4% were dead. That's a fourfold difference in mortality 6 months after a heart attack, independent of other factors, just from being depressed and lonely. At Duke, they did a study where they looked at people who had an angiogram and looked at the blockages in their arteries, and they found that those that were unmarried and had no confidant, after 5 years, half of them were dead. Those that, were either married or had a confidant or both, only about 15 to 20% were dead. Huge differences. And not necessarily even happily married, just married, just not being alone. Loneliness really is killing. And loneliness is contagious. We are already connected with each other. This is a study from Nicholas Christakis at Harvard, published in the New England Journal of Medicine, that if your friends are obese, you're 45% more likely to be obese yourself. If your friends' friends are obese, you're 25% more likely. And if your friends' friends are obese, you're 10% more likely, even if you've never met them. That's how interconnected we already are. And again, it's not just obesity, it's smoking, drinking, depression, happiness, altruism, et cetera, et cetera. On the other hand, what brings us together is healing. This is a study that was in the Lancet, classic study from Dr. David Spiegel at Stanford University. And he took women who had metastatic breast cancer and he randomly divided them into two groups. Both groups got the same chemo and radiation and surgery. But in addition, one group had a support group once a week, just for an hour and a half, once a week for a year, and then they stopped. 5 years later, those women lived twice as long and that was the only difference. They got the same other conventional treatments in both groups. Now, a skeptic might say, oh, come on, give me a break. You mean talking about my feelings is going to help me live longer, going to double my survival if I've got breast cancer? Please. But it does, because we are touchy-feely creatures. We're creatures of community. It's a primal human need to be connected with each other. I think that during the coronavirus, although it's important to sequester people and help them from being exposed to the virus and masks and so on, the isolation itself has its own problems. And so it's really important to reach out to your friends and family, even if it's by a phone call or a text message or a FaceTime or a Zoom call or something like that. You don't necessarily have to physically be with them. It's just the feeling of being loved and cared for that is so healing. It turns out that even on Twitter, they did a study of 148 million tweets. language patterns reflecting negative social relationships, disengagement, and negative emotions, especially anger, predicted heart disease mortality better than 10 of the usual risk factors, including smoking, diabetes, hypertension, obesity, and so on. It's pretty, today Donald Trump was banned from Twitter for life because of all these negative tweets and fomenting, chaos and so on in our country. But it just shows you again how these feelings really do make a difference, not only in our quality of life, but even on our survival. And also meaning is important as well. When I work with people and I say, what do you want to do? Well, I want to live longer. I said, well, why do you want to live longer? They say, gosh, no one's ever asked me that before. There's kind of an assumption that everyone wants to live longer. But again, if a lot of people are lonely and depressed and isolated, they're much more interested. They're not sure if they want to live longer. They just want to get through the day. And so if you can help people connect, find that sense of meaning, then they're much more likely to make lifestyle changes that are life enhancing than ones that are self-destructive. And because these biological mechanisms are so dynamic, most people feel so much better so quickly. It reframes the reason for making these changes from fear of dying to joy of living. Now, like the first patient, who said, I was taking 20 or 30 nitroglycerin tablets a day. That means he was having 20 or 30 episodes of chest pain a day, requiring medication. And by the end of the third week or fourth week, it was essentially pain-free. And so without having to take these things. So, before he couldn't walk across the street without getting chest pain, he was saying. He couldn't make love with his spouse. He couldn't play with his kids. He couldn't go back to work without getting severe angina or chest pain. And within a few weeks, he was pain-free. So he'd say, gosh, okay, what I gain is so much more than what I give up. That's what makes it sustainable. Fear is not a sustainable motivator. I mean, for a month or two after someone's had a heart attack or some diagnosis, they'll do pretty much anything their doctor says or their nurse says, but usually just for about a month or two, and then they stop because fear is not a sustainable motivator. We all know that we're going to die. It's just a question of when. The mortality rate is still 100%. It's one per person, as you know. And so the bigger question is not necessarily how long we live, but how well we live. If it's meaningful, it's sustainable. And, there was a book that was written by Viktor Frankl about people who survived concentration camps in World War II. And it wasn't necessarily the strongest or healthiest that survived. It was the ones who had the strongest sense of meaning and purpose. I have to survive so that I can, whatever, write a book and bear witness or be reunited with my loved ones or whatever. So if you can help or find in yourself a sense of meaning or purpose, that alone will have healing properties. And one way of doing that is choosing not to do something that you otherwise could do. All religions and spiritual paths have dietary guidelines, almost all of them anyway. But they vary from one to another. In one of them, you can eat this, but not that, or certain days of the week, or certain times of the day, or certain months of the year. Is God confused? I don't know. I don't think so. But just the act of choosing not to eat certain foods, for example, whatever the intrinsic benefit is of not eating those foods, just the act of choosing not to eat them can help bring meaning. And if it's meaningful, then it's sustainable. And so if you say, I feel deprived because I can't eat everything I want, that's not sustainable. If you say, I'm choosing not to eat certain foods because what I gain is so much more than what I give up, and that's more meaningful to me, that's something you can continue for a lifetime. And meaning is really the antithesis of depression. I was profoundly and suicidally depressed when I was in college. I was able to take the meaning out of everything when I was 19 years old. Who cares? So what? Big deal. Nothing matters. Why bother? And so on. But I later learned that meaning is malleable. I could take it out, but I can also put it in. And by putting it in, you can make daily life sacred, which is not boring, but rather the most special, the most fun, the most erotic, the most pleasurable, the most joyful, the most meaningful. And if it's pleasurable, then it's sustainable. And, my spiritual teacher, Swami Satchidananda, used to talk about truth is one, paths are many. And that ultimately, if you take any spiritual path, any religion, you'll end up in the same place with the same spiritual truths. Altruism, love, forgiveness, compassion are part of virtually all religions once you get past the differences in rituals and prayers that people, often fight and kill each other over. No, my religion's right. My religion's right. I love you. I'm going to kill you, And so when we get to really the essence of that, why are these traits? Why is altruism and forgiveness and compassion and love so powerful, healing? Because, they really get to the root of why we suffer. If I The anger is the one emotion that's been clearly linked with heart disease, in all studies. And so if I'm angry at someone, if I hate someone, if I have one finger pointing at them, it's three fingers pointing back at me. It creates toxicity in my own life. If I forgive somebody, it doesn't condone or excuse what they've done, but it keeps me from being drawn into that toxicity and so on. These are all things that when we go from the separate I, lonely, depressed self to the we, the wellness, the sense of loneliness to a sense of connection and community, that can really be healing. And also for those of us who are doctors and nurses and other healthcare professionals, it allows us to reclaim why we went into medicine in the first place. If we're just a collection of algorithms, we're going to get replaced by computers or even an iPhone because they do, AI, artificial intelligence already is doing better pattern recognition than many pathologists can do. So it's just a matter of time. But I didn't go into medicine to be a technician. I mean, I think technology and drugs and surgery can be life-saving when used appropriately, but to help people really deal with the underlying cause of their suffering. And when someone's suffering, there's a doorway, there's a catalyst for transformation. Changing your lifestyle is hard. But if you're hurting enough, if you're in enough pain, if you get chest pain every time you walk across the street, like the guy in the first video, then the idea of change becomes more appealing. And one of the reasons I spend so much of my life doing these research studies is that it can redefine what's possible for people. And by doing so, give them new hope and new choices that they didn't have before. So often people say, gosh, I feel so lonely and isolated. If only I had more money, more power, more sex, more beauty, more accomplishment, then I'd be happy. Then when people would love me, then I wouldn't feel so lonely and isolated. And once you set up that view of the world, and by the way, the whole advertising industry, is based on that view of the world. Just buy this product, then you'll be happy. Then, and when you look at an advertisement, there are always people, laughing and loving together because it's like, if you buy this product, the message implied is you'll have love in your life too. But the problem is, and again, this is something that I learned from the Swami, once you've set up that view of the world, however it turns out, you lose because you say, if only I had more whatever, then I'd be happy. Till you get it, you're stressed. If someone else gets it, you're even more stressed, and it really kind of reinforces this very hostile dog-eat-dog zero-sum game view of the world. The more you get, the less there is for me, is what people think, which is not true. And even if you get it, it's very seductive because in the moment it's like, I got it, now I'm happy. But it's usually not enough. It's soon followed by either now what? It's never enough. One patient said, I can't even enjoy the view from the mountain I've climbed. I'm already looking over the next one. Or so what? Big deal. It doesn't really provide that lasting sense of meaning and purpose. And so you say, well, but that didn't do it. Maybe this one will do. Or the letdown that comes from accomplishing a goal is so great. I always make sure I've got 10 projects going at the same time. I can immediately turn my attention to something else. It's a different kind of treadmill. It's like the donkey with a carrot on a stick. It's always just outside its grasp. Now, these so-called stress management techniques, stretching, breathing, meditation, and so on, are certainly they can help you manage stress better, but the ancient swamis and rabbis and priests and monks and nuns didn't develop these techniques just to unclog your arteries or lower your blood pressure or perform better in sports or in business or in school. It can help you do all those things. What they do is they help quiet down our mind and body to experience more of an inner sense of peace and joy and well-being, and to realize that's our natural state, is to be, in most cases, to be peaceful and happy until we disturb it. And then perhaps the supreme irony, not really being mindful of that, we think, gosh, if only I had more whatever, then I'd be happy. And the running after these things that we think are going to bring us a sense of peace and joy and health, we end up disturbing what we could have already if we just did that. It goes back to, I'm not a Hindu, I'm an Undu. These techniques don't bring us a sense of peace. When you meditate at the end of a 20 or 30 meditation, when you're feeling more peaceful, the meditation didn't bring you something you didn't already have. What it did is, at least temporarily, it helped us to stop disturbing what's already there. Now that may sound like, splitting hairs and parsing words, but the implications are profound, because if it's out there, then anyone who has what I think I need to be happy and lovable and peaceful has power over me. If it's me, again, not to blame, but to empower, I can do something about that. And so if my mind is quieted down, I can experience that sense of peace and to remind myself, literally, that those techniques didn't bring it to me, but it was already there. And then the question shifts from how can I get what I think I need to How can I stop disturbing what I already have? And that can be very powerful and empowering. And then you can go out in the world and accomplish even more without getting stressed and without getting sick in the process. So it's really when someone's suffering, there's a sacred opportunity to help them transform their lives in ways that we weren't really talking about in our medical school. That the illness itself can be a powerful doorway and catalyst for transformation. Leonard Cohen, the singer in this country, or actually he's from Canada, used to say, the cracks are what let the light in. And, I remember the first time that I was talking with the Swami, I'd say, I'm really so depressed and sad. He'd go, good. I said, it's not good. It's really bad. He goes, no, it's not bad. It's good because now it's gotten your attention to begin doing something about it. And so to me, what I find is most meaningful in doing these studies and in working with patients is to empower them, to show them when they're suffering, that it can be a doorway for transforming their lives in such powerful ways that I've often had patients say to me things like, having a heart attack was the best thing that ever happened to me. Or, for my case, being depressed, was the best thing that ever happened to me. It opened my mind to things that I wouldn't have been interested in before. And I said, the first time I heard that, I said, what are you, nuts? He said, no, that's what it took to get my attention to begin transforming my life in ways that I'm rediscovering inner sources of peace and joy and well-being. I'm able to accomplish more. I'm able to love more. I'm able to find more meaning in my life and getting more joy in my life. And the paradox is I'm more successful. I'm making more money. I'm accomplishing more by conventional standards because I don't have all that anxiety and fear that goes around when I think it has to come from me. There's an old Zen proverb: before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. You still may do the same things, but the motivation behind it is quite different. It's not to get what you think you need to be happy and healthy, because we already have that. And by doing it to serve others, it doesn't disturb the inner peace and health and joy that's always there. And finally, when we can quiet our mind down, we can listen to our own inner wisdom, our own guru within, our God within, our intuition, whatever name you want to give to that voice that speaks very clearly but very quietly, the one that often wakes us up in the middle of the night and says, hey, Dean, listen, listen up, pay attention. You're not doing something that's in your best interest. And, it gets drowned out by the chatter of everyday life. You can have a dialogue with that voice. At the end of a meditation, I've gotten in the habit of asking that voice, and I'll say hello, it'll say hello back. And I'll say, what am I not paying attention to that I need to pay attention to? And it will tell me. And all of the studies that I've done have come from listening to that voice. It can be incredibly powerful and transformative. So I'm going to stop here. We've covered a lot of ground. And to say, we have some time for dialogue now. Any questions or anything I can do to be helpful, now is a good time to ask them. So thank you so much for this chance to be of service.
Thank you, Dr. Dean. That was really very enlightening. And personally, as you mentioned, your spiritual teacher, Swami Sachidananda, our spiritual mentor, also said that scientific community, especially the scientists, those who are acting for the humanity, bringing this wonderful research to people, they are acting as instruments of divine. And I do see you and other team members in your case as an instrument of divine, bringing this higher teachings and all this which is to benefit humanity to people. So thank you for the hard work. But also, sir, I was reading personally your book, Reversing Heart Disease, and somehow this question was coming up in my mind that you remained persistent throughout this career. In starting, you had so many challenges which you were facing. Some of your peer groups were giving a lot of critical comments. They were not allowing you to even start a study. But what kept you going all these years?
Well, having gone through that suicidal depression and coming on the other side of it, I said, if I'm going to live, I'm going to choose to live. I need to find meaning in my life. And I need to find out what's true for myself. I don't know who to believe anymore. So I'm going to take big risks and do things that I think are meaningful. And I'm going to try a lot of different things. And if it's not going to kill me or hurt me permanently or hurt someone else, I'm going to try, as many different things as I can. And that gave me a lot of courage. I thought, once you've come face to face with death so closely and really stared into that abyss, it's like, well, what's the worst that could happen? If the study doesn't show something, it doesn't mean it's a failure. It just means I'll have learned that didn't work. Thomas Edison famously said that it took him 1,000 tries to find tungsten, to find the right filament for a light bulb. He said, I didn't fail at 999 times. I successfully learned 990 times what didn't work, which then led me to find what did. But the paradox is that all of our studies have worked, because when you can go into it without that, and by listening to that inner voice and really believing it, it gave me the courage and the insight to do things. I mean, I remember I came to India in 1977 when I was a second-year medical student with Sri Swami Satchidananda. And we went to the All India Institute of Medical Science, which is like the Western Harvard of in New Delhi. And I was there talking about the power of meditation and yoga to this very hostile and even, skeptical and even hostile group of Indian doctors. It was almost like their illegitimate stepchild. They wanted to it had to come back to them, the value of what, really came in this country through the US. And now, of course, it's at the All India, they have all kinds of programs using yoga meditation. I remember I was consulting with the king of Nepal, who'd had an angioplasty. This is before he was assassinated. And I was teaching him how to meditate. I thought, how weird is this? I'm in the palace in Kathmandu teaching the king of Nepal how to meditate. It's like, look out your window. Where do you think this comes from? And yet it had to come back to him through the US before he valued, just like so much of your culture has come to ours. So we can really rediscover what we already have as well.
Very true, sir, indeed. And let me just take a few questions. Now, this is, I feel, coming from a healthcare professional. And he's asking that medicine is still heavily biased towards drugs and procedures. Although we have now 4 decades of research available that shows lifestyle modifications can heal most of the chronic ailments, as you shared, why do you feel this message could not percolate down enough even after 40 years?
Well, it is changing, but I learned that we're trained to use drugs in surgery. We're reimbursed to use drugs in surgery. So not surprisingly, we use drugs in surgery. Abraham Maslow once said, if the only tool you have is a hammer, you tend to see the world as a nail. And I think that's true. The average doctor in the US gets 4 hours of nutrition training a year. The average cardiologist gets no nutrition training in 4 years of fellowship. We published an article recently in the Journal of the American College of Cardiology about that. So that's why I spent 16 years to get Medicare to create a new benefit category to cover our program. And now most of the major insurance companies are covering it as well, because if you change reimbursement, it changes medical practice and even medical education. Not, again, because doctors are only interested in money, but that's what we're trained to do. And if there's reimbursement for doing other things, then the training is already beginning to reflect that as well. We've trained hospitals and clinics around the US, and we're getting bigger changes in lifestyle, better clinical outcomes, bigger cost savings, and better adherence than anyone's ever shown. So we're really kind of creating a new paradigm for healthcare, not just sick care.
Great. Dr. Dean Ornish, there's another question over here that how do you see the future of medicine? These changes you've just suggested on such a broad spectrum are wonderful. How soon do you see them percolating into general practice?
Well, I think it's already happening. There's a convergence of forces that finally, after so many decades, make this the right idea at the right time. On the one hand, the limitations, again, drugs and surgery properly used can be life-saving. I'm well trained in how to use them. But there's more and more evidence that they don't work nearly as well in chronic diseases as people had once thought. There are now 8 randomized trials of people who have heart disease, finding that stents and angioplasties in stable patients really don't work. They don't prevent heart attacks. They don't reduce angina. They don't prevent strokes. They don't help you live longer. In the case of type 2 diabetes, getting your blood sugar down with drugs doesn't work nearly as well as getting it down with lifestyle. And you can help wean off drugs in many cases under your doctor's care. In the case of men with early stage prostate cancer, there are 2 large-scale randomized trials published in the New England Journal of Medicine that men with early stage prostate cancer who did nothing, then only 1 out of 50 men who had surgery or radiation actually benefited from them. The other 49 didn't benefit. It was huge costs and often remained in the most personal ways because they're either impotent or incontinent or both for no real benefit. And so at the same time, we've shown that lifestyle medicine can often reverse heart disease, reverse type 2 diabetes, reverse the progression of early stage prostate cancer at a fraction of the cost, and the only side effects are good ones. 86% of the $3.7 trillion that we spent in the US last year on healthcare are for treating chronic diseases, so many of which are preventable and even reversible through changing lifestyle. That can free up a huge amount of money to make better care available to more people at lower costs. And again, the only side effects are good ones.
I'll be combining two questions that have come over here together. This says that do you feel there is a need to redesign the curriculum of doctor training? I think the answer to that would be an absolute yes, but I'll let you answer in detail. The second is, can one also receive some training from what you have been sharing through your institute?
Well, thank you. Yes, I mean, what we learn is great, but we need to include this as well. It's science proven, it's evidence based. It should be included, and it is more and more now. We've been training hospitals and clinics and physician groups around the U.S. Medicare recently agreed to cover our program when offered virtually at the same rate. So we're now offering it virtually. We actually had to do with our Alzheimer's study. We had to change and offer the program virtually to the Alzheimer's patients because of the coronavirus. We could no longer meet with them in person. And I was surprised at how well it worked just by doing it via Zoom like we're doing today. And so it'll make it easier to make our program available even around the world when it's done virtually, because whether you're across the town or across the globe, if it's done virtually, then we can do it anywhere. And so we're talking now with some companies about partnering with them so that we can do just that. And our hope is that by this time next year, for sure, that we can be offering both the training and the program itself to people throughout the world, including India and Asia.
That's great news. Thank you, sir.
So one final question, sir, I'll take now. And this is regarding the pandemic, because now the question is that, do you see that the current pandemic will catalyze the global face of the healthcare worldwide?
What's the question again? I want to make sure I'm understanding it correctly.
Yes, sir. The question is that, do you feel the current ongoing pandemic will catalyze in some way the changing face of the global healthcare? Will it make it better or make it worse, the global healthcare worldwide?
Well, I think that, without in any way trying to minimize the horrible ravages of the coronavirus, one of the interesting things is, like I said, we wouldn't have virtualized our program were it not of the necessity of doing that. So something good came out of that. And so much of the focus has been on, preventing exposure to the coronavirus, which of course is important, staying at home, social distancing, wearing masks and so on. But very little has been written about the other half of the equation, which is how to enhance your immune system so that despite your best efforts, if you're exposed to it, you can reduce the risk of the chances of getting sick or have a milder case of it. Just as one example, Sheldon Cohen did a study where they actually dripped rhinovirus into volunteers' noses. I'm not sure how they got anybody to volunteer for that study. 100% of them got infected, but not everybody who got infected got sick. And they found that those that had only 1 to 3 social ties, what they called as a phone call or a visit from a friend every 2 weeks, were over 4 times more likely to actually develop the signs and symptoms of a cold than those that had 6 or more. So again, when you connect with other people, when you're depressed, your immune system is depressed. And when you can connect with other people, it can enhance that. And so I think that, we're beginning to realize that as horrible as the coronavirus is, that there's some good lessons that we're learning from that. And I'm grateful to share them with you today.
Thank you so much, sir. And friends, before we close, we'd like for all of you to take a look at some of the best-selling books that Dr. Dean Ornish has authored. All these books are available through his website, also through Amazon.in in India, Amazon.com worldwide. And I encourage you to especially tune into his best-selling, all of them are actually bestsellers, but Reversing Heart Disease is where the journey began, and Undo It is the book that sir also mentioned, which has a very broad spectrum of how to overcome, many chronic diseases, how they are connected, as Dr. Dean Ornish again shared today, and what are the common changes that we can make in our lifestyle to tackle and prevent the onset of many of these illnesses. So once again, thank you so much, Dr. Dean Ornish, in such a short span of time to share such wisdom, the length and breadth of your research with all of our friends so generously.
I'm deeply grateful for the chance to be of service. I hope at least some of this has been useful. And I appreciate the chance to honor my spiritual teacher in this way as well. Thank you again.
Thank you, sir.
All the best.
Good night.